So what's exciting about these Communities Create projects is that we're wanting to really bring people together in this time where we're all apart.
Be part of a time capsule of life during the pandemic through creative outputs.
Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Amelia King and I'm the Co-Director of Engagement at the Creative Innovation Studio at FCAD at Ryerson University. And I also oversee the Transmedia Zone, which is Ryerson's Media Innovation Incubator. So welcome back to another week of Communities Create. Hello to everyone in the live session, as well as those live streaming on Communities Create or CBC Arts. Okay, so first, I'm going to tell you a little bit of background on our initiative and do a round of intros, and then we're just going to jump right in, okay? So for those of you who might not know, the goal of Communities Create is to support independent members of the creative community and to use creativity to unite Canadians and help express how we're feeling, because sometimes words just aren't enough, especially in times like these. So we're also providing micro grants to independent artists to lead these interactive sessions through an amazing network of collaborators. This week, it's Documentary Week, and today's workshop is Documenting Elder Stories, led by the brilliant Dominique Keller and co-sponsored by the NFB and Story, Money, Impact. I'm so excited to be moderating this workshop. Just so you know, the TMZ is a huge proponent of documentary storytelling, and I'm also working on several docs on sensitive subjects with my own production company. So this hits close to home. Making sure we capture and tell stories accurately and fairly is really the main mission of any documentary storyteller. So before we get started, here are some ground rules to make sure everyone has the best experience possible. Number one, this one's easy, okay? Maybe it's not so easy, but you need to do it. So try the exercises yourself. Just do it, don't be shy, no one's judging. This is definitely a safe space and you'll take away so much more that way, okay? So to everybody watching the live stream, we hope you're going to participate too, along with the people inside this interactive session. Introduce yourself, play along, and ask questions using the Communities Create hashtag on Twitter, and we'll try to get to as many comments as possible. And for those of you in the session, please pin the Communities Create video. You can use the chat to comment and ask questions. Your microphone is going to be muted, and moderators will unmute you if you have a question to ask. And just know any audio is going to be recorded and archived. Also know that your video is going to be controlled by you and viewable by the other participants. So now I'd like to introduce Diana Breacher, who heads up our mental health task force. Diana, one of the reasons we're doing this is to give people a creative outlet for their emotions. Can you tell us a little bit about your role with Communities Create?
Absolutely, thank you, and welcome everyone. I'm a psychologist, and I'm very aware that COVID can bring up lots of emotions, and we're inviting you to explore some of those emotions in the context of each of these Communities Create sessions. And so what we wanted to do, and I'm here today with one of our PhD graduate students, Amy, is to provide some support if the support is needed. And so this is how we're going to fly. If something's going on for you during the session and you want to reach out, just ask for Diana or Amy in the chat. Otherwise, after the session, we've been doing a weekly debrief. And so that means is after the recording is over, we kind of hang around afterwards and chat about anything that may have come up. Sometimes it's directly related to your feelings and other times it's not. And we're just here to provide a bit of a safety net. And in addition, if something comes up for you after the session and you want to check out some resources, on the Communities Create website, we have a list of resources in the city that are accessible and free to provide emotional support. So with that, I'm really looking forward to the session. See you later.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Diana. Okay, now I'd like to turn it over to our sponsoring orgs to say a few words. First, Anthony Swan from Story, Money, Impact. Tell us a little bit about your org's reason for joining the initiative and what you're most excited about.
Hello, everyone. I'm Anthony Trung Swan. I'm the Outreach Director for Story Money Impact. We're an organization that really believes that documentary film has this incredible potential to create positive social change in the world when it's used strategically. So our work is all in uplifting the work of independent media makers by connecting them with allies and strategic audiences to enable that positive change. And we believe that when supported by aligned partnerships, people who have been doing this work for decades and have that expertise and that built-in community, that issue-based media like Dominique's amazing film can build empathy and action. So we love independent creators. We love matchmaking. We love to build connections and partnerships as a way to uplift this entire issue ecosystem. And we love strategy. We carefully balance the creativity and courage of our filmmakers with really clear-minded, strategic execution, whether it's with artistic treatments or with impact plans. So that's the work that we do. And we heard about Dominique's film, Love the Last Chapter, which is about well, I'll let Dominique explain it to you, but it's about elders falling in love and being intimate and their agency in the world. And we love the idea of it so much that we chased her to apply for a program. And we couldn't be happier. And now that, especially in this COVID context, I think what you're about to learn is really important. I know that since learning about Dominique's film and getting to know her, I've kind of talked to my grandmother about a few things. Maybe not all of them were appropriate, but I certainly learned a lot. So I'm really happy to support Love the Last Chapter and Dominique Keller and Community Creates, and the Transmedia Zone was someone that we reached out to in the course of our research and outreach for allowing media to create impact. And we're really happy to see it come to fruition like this. So I'm really excited to see what we're all in for today.
Amazing. Thank you, Anthony. We're excited too. Okay, now over to Darren Clausen of the NFB Northwest Studio. Tell us, what excites you most about this, and tell us a little bit about Dominique.
Well, for us, the huge thing was being able to get word out about this project and with Dominique. She's a wonderful filmmaker, and the NFB, our mandate, we've been around for 75 years as a public producer and distributor. Over 80 years now, actually. And it's partnering up with organizations like this is really how we give back to the community. What we want to do is reflect Canadians and the Canadian values and back to Canadians. And there's not a lot out there with respect to elderly people. So when Dominique came to us, I think it was about a year and a half ago, we were pretty excited about this project. And we just wanted to find a way to make it work. We've worked with Dominique before, and that was, I can't remember how long ago that was, but so I've known her quite a while. Her energy is absolutely infectious, but in a good way, not in a COVID way. And she is just wonderful to work with. And when, it takes a real sensitivity to work with, especially with seniors and especially on a topic like this. And I think she was just perfectly suited to do this film. And we're really happy with the way it's going. And I'm looking forward to hearing more from Dominique.
Okay, perfect. Dominique, over to you. Tell us a little bit about yourself, and then you can jump right into our workshop. We're very excited.
Unmute myself. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining. I see some people introducing themselves in the chat. Hello, Luke. Hello, Sue. Hello, Jackie. Really excited to be doing this workshop today with you all. As everyone introduced, I'm Dominique Keller. I'm a documentary filmmaker. I specialize in documenting elder stories. And really, how did I get into this niche of filmmaking? It's a really good question. It actually began with my grandma. I was a documentary filmmaker. I have been for many years, but my grandmother came to me and said that she really, at 86 years old, had this dream to learn how to drive. It was kind of some unfinished business in her life. And I thought, wow, that's kind of a crazy idea, Grandma. Why don't I help you to learn how to drive? And why don't I document you learning how to drive? And that's what launched me and my grandma off into this documentary that I ended up making for CBC Short Docs. And it also launched me into this world of telling senior stories. Since then, I've told many senior stories, done several documentaries, and right now I am working with the NFB, as Darren mentioned, on a feature-length documentary called Love the Last Chapter. And that documentary documents the stories of seniors and their romances while they're living in senior residences. And it's been an amazing adventure. I actually moved into the seniors residence last year. I did everything. I ate my meals there. I played bingo. I did seniors aerobics classes. And what I learned there really changed my life. And it was such a rewarding experience. And I'm so passionate about telling senior stories. So I just wanted to share a little bit of my work with you. And we were going to play a 30-second trailer of Grandma Learns to Drive, the short documentary I made with CBC. And then I'll move on to the lesson plan.
I'm with Derek Brown's Driving Academy. I'm here for your lesson today.
I never learned to drive. That's my number one regret.
What happens to dreams that you put off? They just sit and haunt you.
Whoa. More attention to the road.
I wanted a test for learn to drive.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you see it, you have to slow down because you're in a...
School zone?
Yeah,
Ding, ding, ding. How many times have you taken? Are you sure you want to know?
This is time number what?
9?
It sounds like it's going to be a long haul.
It's funny when you get some distance from a project, you begin to love it again. Yeah, so what's the goal of this session? The goal of this session is to use documentary filmmaking techniques as a meaningful way to connect with older adults in our lives. And why right now is it so important for us to connect with older adults in our lives? I'm sure many of you are aware that this pandemic has hit that population, that demographic specifically harder. And it is really important that we both connect with older adults in our lives and that we document their experiences, or at least facilitate them documenting their own experiences. And that's really what this little workshop is about. How can we all work together to get these stories documented in this really unique period of history that we're all living in right now? So the whole Communities Create workshop series asks the question, how are you feeling right now? This workshop is a little bit different in that we are working together to ask older adults, how are you feeling right now? How can I help you to tell your story? How has this pandemic, how has this massive global event changed how you see things, changed how you see the world? So in this session, we're going to talk about a few things. First of all, we're going to cover documentary ethics. Then we're going to discuss how do we choose our subject. We're going to look at picking story focus, and then work on crafting meaningful interview questions. Finally, we're going to have a brief discussion about how do I capture these stories? What technology is useful to me at this time? So, a big part of this workshop, as Amelia mentioned, is interactivity. I'm going to be looking in the chat. I would love for you to share. Don't be shy. That's a big part of the work, and this whole series is about us sharing with one another. So lesson 1, let's talk about ethics. What are the ethics when working with vulnerable populations? One thing I want to highlight is, as documentary filmmakers, we're not journalists. The relationship we have with our subjects is slightly different. Often it's a longer term relationship. So some of the classic journalism techniques and ethical principles are slightly different in a documentary context. And that's particularly applicable to this situation right now because many of the elders that you will potentially be interviewing are family members, co-workers, people that you have a long-term relationship with. And likely you have a much more personal relationship with your subject than a traditional journalism relationship. I could do a whole workshop on ethics, but we're just going to cover a small thing, and I want to share with you some of my guiding principles when working with subjects. One of the key principles is to be transparent. So explain the process, take the time, explain your motivations for documenting this interview, and explain where you potentially see this work going. The second rule of thumb is ask permission. Always ask permission of your subjects to record an interview or to do the interview in the first place, and we have to respect if someone doesn't want to share at this time. Next, be open to collaboration. That is a great way to share power. When we collaborate with our subjects, when we're open to their questions, when we're open to their suggestions, it becomes a much less hierarchical relationship and more of a relationship of equals, which is super important. Finally, share your work. If you put together a great interview of your subject, or even if you put together an interview you're a little bit embarrassed about, the most important thing is to go back to whoever it is you're interviewing and share your work with them. Don't just take that story and leave. Okay. So our goal, our first and most important goal in this workshop is to use documentary techniques as a tool to first connect in a deep and meaningful way with our elders. So the really neat thing about this is that even if at the end of the day, you don't do anything with this interview that we're going to create, if you are sitting and you are present and you are listening to your subject, both you and your interview subject are going to have an immediate positive outcome. How cool is that? And no matter where your final piece goes, your work is going to be a success. So just think about that when you're judging yourself, whether what you're doing has value or whether you're doing a good job or not. If you are just sitting and you are actively listening, you are already doing something really great. And the neat thing is, if you're doing that, you're going to also create some of the best work. Now we're going to move on to exercise 1. So there's 4 different exercises in this workshop, and we're on to number 1. And this is our interactive part of the workshop. So I'm going to ask you, and I'll read them out in the chat if you can share, who is an older person in your life that you want to connect with, that you potentially would like to interview? It's probably best not to use specific names. You can use things like a coworker, maybe it's my grandmother, maybe it's my mother. Just think about these people in your lives that you would love to hear some more of their story. I've got one from Laura. My elder, she knows our river language. How beautiful is that? Yes. Luke, my childhood caregiver. Wow. Tom, we've got Jeannie, my grandmother who dealt with loss and moved to Germany from Vietnam. Wow. And Tom, fellow tenants in a seniors building where I live. These are all potentially super interesting stories. Thanks for sharing. Lorna, my 91-year-old uncle, of my husband. Great. Amelia, my hubby's grandma. She's a worker at a long-term health facility. Super interesting. Kathy, Anne, a 92-year-old from Montreal, has 3 of 6 kids when living in Tehran in late 50s and early 60s. Oh, wow. Some international history there. Great, you guys. These are all amazing people to be interviewing. And thanks for sharing. Karen D, a great granny. Oh, a granny activity, a granny activist. Yes. Granny activists are great. Strong women always make me happy. Okay, so I'm going to move on to lesson number 2, and maybe you're still thinking of that person. That's okay. You'll come to it. Maybe you have a list of people that you would be interested in interviewing. So lesson number 2 is, where do we put our story focus? And this is where we can often fall into a common pitfall. As human beings, we have a tendency to want to achieve, to want to cover everything, to leave no rock unturned. And in a way, documentary filmmaking is the opposite of that. You actually can't tell all the stories. You can't collect all the pebbles on the beach, all the sand on the beach. And if you do try to tell all the stories or collect all the stories, you risk just telling a little piece of everything and not going very deep into anything. As a director, which is what you're going to be when you tell these stories, when you do your interviews, your job is to pick your focus. What is your story focus? Choose a narrow story focus and tell that story really well. I'm going to use my grandma as an example here. So recently, my grandma did move into a senior's residence. Actually, it happened just before the pandemic. And then the pandemic hit and my grandma's residence went into lockdown, and she found herself suddenly confined to her room almost 24 hours a day for 3 months straight. While she was in her room, she faced many challenges. She told me about the food. Those were some of her challenges. She had challenges with the telephone. She had challenges with not being able to buy wardrobe she liked. I wanted, using this as an example, I want to just focus on maybe 1 or 2 of those challenges. And for me, that focus is the confinement challenge. What is it like not to be able to go outside of your room? What is it like to be confined to a small space? So there's an example of narrowing focus. Now, here's our next exercise. Exercise number 2. I want you to write in the chat what unique challenges did the person you want to interview face. And if you're not totally sure, you can also imagine this. This is a common thing we do as documentary filmmakers. We imagine potential challenges or potential storytelling elements. That helps us to give us an idea of what are some interesting stories we'd like to cover, what is our general vision and direction. Or maybe you do know some challenges. So here we go. Don't worry about your ideas being stolen, because everyone's idea is like a fingerprint, and the way you tell the story is unique to you. So even if someone else gets some inspiration from this, they're never going to capture and document the same story that you are going to. So share with me in the chat, what are some of the unique challenges that you imagine or potentially that your subject did go through during this pandemic? Oh, I've got some coming in right now. Let's see. Okay, so Amelia is saying that her subject worked in a system that was designed to put costs and economics over people in care. Yes, this is a big challenge. Often with privatized healthcare, you can see this economic model getting in the way, or the conflict between economics and caregiving. Really interesting focus. From Lorna, our uncle says he cannot face going into lockdown again, as he did when the pandemic first started. He's able to go out now, but this may end if there's a second wave of COVID-19. Oh, this is a really timely moment, right? Like, we've all gone through the pandemic the first time, but I don't think anybody is thinking about, okay, well, and maybe people are, what about this next time? Can I do this again? And that could be your focus, right? That's your question that you ask him. Can you do this again? What does that look like? Not bouncing back as younger people might after weeks of lack of exercise. What to do? Okay, so this is that physical decline that we've all faced. during the lockdown is like many people are struggling to stay active, have struggled to stay active. And then the body has, certainly my grandma speaks about that, how her body has declined. And how do you bounce back? The 4-story focus, Laura. Whoa, I'm getting tons of them. Whoa, this is good. This is really exciting for me. I love story. How does a young Indigenous girl know when she would keep hold on to the language when she went into residential school? She has an epic journey. Now she is most fluent and the only living speaker on our river. Oh, wow. So this is a story of resilience of language. And how, and that could be a separate story. I don't know how connected that is to the pandemic. Maybe you have that in your mind, or maybe you just want to capture this story about language right now while she's around, and that's okay too. Great. From Tom, and I'll read a couple more. Well, okay, I'm gonna get to Kathy and then I'm gonna stop. As many of the tenants see where they're living right now, where do they go from here? How? Living how? Yes, and that's a big question. Where do we go from here, living in a seniors facility? Being an environmental activist in a region long dominated by resource extraction and conservative policies. Yes, that is also interesting. And how are you going to connect that to the pandemic, or maybe not? Anne was an incredibly lucky lady, lived in her own home in the country, and her daughter, an RN, left work and taking care of her full time. So extremely well taken care of with less restrictions, and can get outdoors on her property. Okay, so here's a story of an elder that perhaps didn't face those same challenges, but maybe she faced different challenges. Okay, how are you amusing yourself? Okay, so I can't read anymore, but I can see your creative juices are flowing and you've got lots of ideas of stories, and how important is it for you to go out and capture those stories? You know that we're never gonna have this period in time right now, so this is it. Time is now. Okay. If you're not totally sure, that's okay. Pick up the phone, call your elder, call the older person in your life, and have a chat with them. You might get some ideas from that. Often we call that a pre-interview. And that there's nothing wrong with just having that first conversation, and that might help you to narrow down your focus. Okay. All right, exercise number 3. We're moving on. We've narrowed our focus now. We've picked our subject. Now pick one story you really want to hear about. What is one place, one little handful of sand where you're going to sift through all the grains? I'm going to give you an example from my grandma's story. So she has told me that she is confined in her room. And then my grandma told me a story of how she kept her sanity. And she said, thank goodness I had a balcony. I would walk out every day. I still walk out every day. And I can go outside and I can feel the fresh air on my skin. I can see the blue sky. And I walk back and forth on that little balcony. 5 steps one way, I turn around. 5 steps the other way. And I count those steps. And I count them until I have 600 steps. Then I sit and I look at the sky and I begin again. And my grandmother did this for 3 months. She might even still be doing it now. That story really struck me. I don't know why stories strike us as human beings, and that's where it's kind of where art and science come together. But for some reason, that story she told me touched my heart. And I think when you hear something like that, or maybe something else, it will touch your heart. And then I encourage you to dive deep into that story. Often we say in society, go big or go home. I say as a documentary filmmaker, we need to go small and go big. So pick something small, like my grandma walking on that balcony. And I challenge you to go really big and find the universal in the incredible personal. And often as we go more personal, we also go more universal. It's kind of counterintuitive, really. So let's pick that one story. I see people are doing it right now, and share some of those stories with us. And I think some of them are being shared. Little big stories are the ones with impact. So true, Amelia. So does anyone have a little story they know of that they'd like to share with the group? Like grandma walking on the balcony back and forth. A moment that an elder has shared with you. Learning to FaceTime with family. What is this? This is a good one, and it goes into what I'm going to talk about a little bit later, is this relationship to technology and these challenges with technology. And certainly we've all moved into this online world, and our elders are definitely also starting to look at the online world if they haven't already. And this is an interesting story about an elder who had to overcome this huge technological boundary to connect with their family. Right there is a really small story that has great potential to be a big story. My mother finding the telegraph to her great-grandmother from the army saying her son was injured in World War II. It was in the back of a picture frame. Ooh, that's a good one. You're sitting at home, you're suddenly confined into this space, and you start to adventure inward. And such an interesting story. You pull open this picture frame, and there's this telegraph that you never even knew existed. And it's like a time capsule into the past. That's a good one. I like it. I like it. Okay, time for maybe one or two more. Our uncle's panic when the daily call with my husband did not happen. He had forgotten that we were going camping. Oh, that's so sad. That's heart-wrenching, that one. And that really illustrates for me this connection and how important it is to have people checking in on you. And really a part of this exercise is checking in on our elders. And that's where I'm getting to. It's this, not only are we documenting their story, but we're also demonstrating to them that you are important, you matter to me. Oh, and boy, they're really coming now. Okay. During pandemic isolation, when the lonely times hit, my elder would pick up her wool and go out to her outside porch, dress warmly, and begin to weave, and that brings a peaceful place, as she learned that you cannot weave without a peaceful heart. Oh, that's beautiful. That's a beautiful one, and so visual. So, that one you could capture as an audio interview and then get some beautiful visuals afterwards. Very interesting how that weaving process calms the mind. Says a lot about us as human beings. Okay, a couple more, then I gotta move on. Looking at old playbills from attending the theater, that's a moment of going into the past to manage and deal with the present and how we can draw strength from the past. My husband's grandma, retired long-term care worker. Yes. And she retired. So that was the end of that. The pandemic finished off her career. Time, as you become older, the less of it remains available, the faster it seems to move. Time itself is so subjective. Oh, time is an interesting one, and I have a motif throughout my documentary where I keep showing clocks, and they keep getting cut out of this edit, but I think time is such an interesting and rich documentary topic, and especially the limit, how we get to a certain point of our lives and we're looking forward and there's less in front of us than behind. And what does that mean? Okay, got to move on. Thank you. I love all this sharing. So lesson 3 is about crafting meaningful questions. So how do we help our interview subject to tell their story? Here's just a few tips that have helped me. First things first, make sure your interviewee is comfortable. Make some eye contact. And maybe that just means looking at the green dot at the top of your computer like I am right now. Also squaring your shoulders to your interview subject if you're visually seeing them, leaning in. These are all body language cues that you care and that you're present. And that will make a huge difference to whoever's sitting in front of you, either by video or in real life. And then the most important thing is to listen. And I mean actively listen. Don't be thinking about what's going on tomorrow. Don't be thinking about anything else. Just train yourself to be present in the here and in the now. Easier said than done, I know. Next is plan your questions. I think President Eisenhower said, in preparing for battle, I've always found that plans are useless, but planning is indispensable. I think that's really applicable to documentary filmmaking. Make a plan. It's part of creating your vision, but then be prepared to perhaps leave that plan. Next one is very important. Ask open-ended questions. So by that I mean avoid asking questions that solicit a yes or a no answer. Like, for example, I could ask my grandma, did you exercise during the epidemic, or during the pandemic rather? And my grandma would just simply answer yes. Or you could ask someone, what did you have a good time? Did you struggle during the pandemic? You're probably going to get a yes. These aren't very useful for an interview. Much more useful is to ask questions that start with how, why, and what. What did you do while you were locked in your room, Grandma? Walk me through your day. So not did you exercise, but what did you do? And then when she tells me that story about exercising, I can ask her, well, why did you walk on your balcony? Why your balcony? How did walking on your balcony make you feel? What have you learned, Grandma? These will help you to get much more meaningful answers. Another trick I always use is to ask for clarification. Don't be afraid to look dumb. Often I'd like somebody to give me an answer 2 or 3 times. I can get that by just asking them to clarify. Asking questions about things I don't understand. It's a great way to get 2 or 3 runs at the same answer, especially if it's a piece of information that you particularly want information about. And the next, ask one question at a time. Just keep it simple. If you ask someone 3 or 4 questions, it's like their brain's like a computer and it just goes. Try it, you'll see. So keep your questions simple, one at a time. It sometimes can help to let your subject in on your process. Let them know what you're trying to achieve. This has helped me before, and it's part of that collaborating with the subject. Sometimes I say, you know, Grandma, I'm just really trying to understand this whole balcony experience and what it means to you, because I think it's important for people. That if I haven't gotten it another way, I will sometimes try that. Essentially, as documentary filmmakers, when you're doing an interview, you're on like a fishing expedition or a treasure hunt, and you're trying all these different ways to get the gold. And lastly, ask them if they have anything to add. You never know what somebody's going to share then. So that's just some overview of different ways to ask questions in an interview. There's lots of other things to share, but it gives you some tips that have worked for me. Now we're going to move on to exercise number 4, which is let's craft some questions, and you can write them in the chat. So how are you going to get that little tiny specific story told in a way that it expands out into the universal? How are you going to grab that little piece of sand in your hand and let every single pebble roll through your fist? Throw me some questions. Oh, the other one that works really well too is the big, long, awkward silence. If you leave a big, long, awkward silence, as human beings, we are programmed to fill it. Don't be afraid to be awkward. So I'm going to leave one for you guys right now. Ah, Amelia, she couldn't stand the silence. I love it. Okay, here's her question. How do you think long-term care has changed since you retired? It's great. Amelia's asking a how question, so she's going to get a nice full answer. It's really interesting. I haven't heard from you yet, Darren, at the NFB. Let's do it. Throw me some questions. Oh, he's putting on his glasses. Good. Right. Don't be afraid. There's no bad questions. We always say that, and it's true. Okay, Sally, great. Thanks, Sally. When you got the photo after your mother died, why did you decide to take it out of the frame? Ah, this is a good one. It's getting those processes out, those specific details that helps the audience to really visualize that moment in time when that photo was taken out of the frame. Laura, first go to Tim's and bring a French vanilla coffee. That's a good way to connect with your subject. And an old-fashioned donut. Okay, well, you know how to connect with me now. And join my elder at the table. Just listen, feel the laughter, ask about what it is like to begin to write our language for the first time. This is a beautiful note about that importance of listening and how important it is to just be quiet and present. And maybe that's all a certain subject's going to need from you. Okay, Amelia, what does dignity mean to you when considering elder care? Another great what question. And yeah, dignity is a really key topic right now. How do we maintain the dignity of our elders while providing a safe environment for them? Let's see, what tunes did you like to play on your violin during the lockdown? Great, they're gonna get a nice list of tunes, and then hopefully you can use some of those tunes in your documentary, although getting rights is a whole nother question. How did you end up living here? Where do you see yourself moving next? How do you see living here? These are all great questions. How did you end up? Where do you see yourself moving? How do you see yourself leaving here? And the importance of asking those questions one at a time, and you're really going to get a nice sketch for your story there. Getting all the basics. What do you miss most about during the lockdown? And you say you can't live through the lockdown. Do you want to end your life? Okay, so that's that one. And this is a challenging one, and it's going to, it falls into our ethics world. So when asking sensitive questions like that, one of the most important things is that permission aspect. So if you're going to be asking those difficult questions, first of all, I would ask them later in the interview. And secondly, I would ask permission to ask a question like that. And I might reword it like, you say you can't, what do you mean when you say you can't live through the lockdown again? That way you're asking a more open question and you're likely to get a more open answer. So yeah, that one is a can of worms, and definitely we have to be very careful when asking those questions. But you know what? these are difficult times, and we don't want to turn away from the fact that these are difficult times for everyone. Okay, those are great questions. Thank you so much for bringing them forward and doing the work. I really appreciate all of your hard work today. And I want to point out that the next step for you, you've chosen your subject, you've chosen your focus, you've crafted your questions. Now guess what? It's time to go out and do it. Yeah. And so there's lots of ways to do it. I'm going to go into this next lesson about the different video softwares that are available. I would suggest right now to do a remote interview. It's the safest way to interview your elder, unless that person is living in your bubble. So right now you could do very similar to the way that I'm running this workshop. You can Zoom with your elder if they have that capacity. Or there's also other softwares like Skype, Microsoft Meeting. There's different softwares that are available that you can do a video interview with your subject. This is a safe way to do an interview. Perhaps your subject isn't so technologically savvy. Then there is a way, journalists do it all the time, to simply telephone your subject and to tape that call. You can download lots of different apps for your iPhone or for your Android phone, and there's a million of them. One of them, for example, is called Tape a Call. I've used it before. It works quite well. That way you can tape your call with your subject, and you've got a beautiful audio interview that you can use later. Again, if that person is living in your bubble, say it's your grandmother or your mother, and you happen to be living with them, then you can do a more traditional interview with them. If you do record only audio, there's a beautiful Communities Create workshop that focuses on creating a video diary. I'd suggest you look in on that. There's lots of interesting information about how to include photos once you've captured that audio interview. Right now, for example, I'm doing some interviews with seniors that are in lockdown in a senior's residence. They're not technologically savvy. So I figured out that I'm going to, tomorrow, I have an iPad that's connected to my telephone cell data. I'm going to load myself up on Zoom and then drive that laptop over to the senior's residence, sit in the car on my computer, and do a Zoom interview that way. So I'm providing them with all the technology they need to do the interview, and I'm not putting them at risk. And really, they'll literally have an iPad with my face on it. So that's one way that I'm getting around some of the barriers of doing interviews at this time in a safe manner. So I just want to end this up by saying the most important thing to take away is just get the interview. Don't focus on so much on what you're going to do with the interview, or how you're going to cut the interview, or where it's going to go, and what film festival you're going to try to get it in. That's all later stuff. The most important thing is to get that interview right now in the raw, and find the simplest way to do it. And that's your challenge for this workshop. I'm so looking forward to seeing your work and hearing these stories that you've shared in the chat. I'm very inspired. So most important thing, get it done safely, and send it to us. All right.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you so much. So on behalf of everyone, again, thank you, Dominique. You shared so many really insightful and meaningful tips that I think we can all put into practice pretty much immediately. Thank you again to the NFB and Story Money Impact. And of course, thanks to everyone who joined our workshop. I hope you enjoyed this and you took something away from it. A reminder again, submit your work. You can share on Communities Create using the hashtag CommunitiesCreate. Feel free to share your interview questions if you want. We can come back with some feedback. You know, it's never early enough to share your work as a work in progress, okay? Next week, we're going to be making games with Brent George using Unreal Engine 4, and that's presented by Agora Studio. So if you're interested in learning about making very interesting and fun games, join that session. And also know you could check out the archives at communitiescreate.ca. And there we've got sessions on photography, comedy, podcasting, vocals, and so much more. Okay, now I'd like to invite you to stay for a well-being and mental health debrief with Diana. That is it for us. Thank you to everybody who is leaving now. We will take a moment while we transition away from the live stream and over to the debrief. See you next week.